So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Chabano. I serve as PNW advisor, nuclear disarmament and nuclear disarmament matters for the mission of Kiribati. I also serve as the policy and advocacy director of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. Apologies that we're organizing this event on the final day of the NPT PrepCom. But I felt, and the other organizers, that this is a very timely discussion for us to have regarding Article VI of the NPT, as well as the complementarity between Article VI and the TPNW as well. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to a really fantastic individual I work very closely with, Ms. Kina Sito, who's the first secretary of Kiribati, who will briefly give the introduction.
Thank you, Christian. Good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for your participation and your presence this afternoon. My name is Kina Sito from the Permament Missions of Kazakhstan. And Kiribati is proud to be co-sponsor in this event on Article VI of the NPT with the Philippines and Kazakhstan, as well as the NAPF, that's Nuclear Age Foundation, and the NPT, which is Return and New Organization affiliated with the NAM. For us, we contend that the nuclear weapon states have a responsibility to engage in good faith on eliminating their nuclear arsenals. However, we are concerned that they have not yet completely disarmed their weapons. Sadly, the current trend is moving in the opposite direction. As a result of our concerns, we embrace the humanitarian initiative as well as the nuclear disarmament initiative to raise awareness about the humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons, especially in affected states like the US. We also contend that the path forward to nuclear disarmament is a complete prohibition of nuclear weapons as contained in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is why we recognize that the TPNW complements and advances the commitment contained in Article VI. In addition, within the nuclear disarmament arena, we contend the necessity for states to address the legacy of nuclear weapons. We believe that seeking financial assistance and environmental remediation are key components of Article VI, as the nuclear weapon states have a special responsibility to address the fast use of their nuclear weapons. On this note, I'm looking forward to the discussions and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kina, for your remarks. Next, we will hear from the Ambassador Permanent in the Philippines, in Geneva, Ambassador Roto, who talked about lessons learned from the 2010 NPT conference. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. Good afternoon, everyone. Every time I try to recall our presidency in 2010, I suffer from post-traumatic stress because nothing was agreed until everything was agreed. We were able to get agreement on certain things, and when somebody in another room says something that offended someone there, it could easily unravel delicately negotiated language. For example, in the discussions in Room 4, on transparency in point 5, we started discussing that early, and we thought it would be the easiest points to discuss. In the end, we pushed it down all the way to J. We couldn't get agreement on it because of differing appreciations of wanting it to be a hard obligation as opposed to the P5 just showing good faith and willingness to embark on to do transparency as part of their obligation to try to get on Article 6 to eventually get the world. Because at that point, we all know who has what. It's not really an exercise in revealing what you have, where it was really an exercise to give the P5 the opportunity to get a foothold in one aspect of Article 6 with the hope that it could start something. So it's one of those delicate things. And I'm also glad to see Jonathan here, who was there. He had less white hair and more of it 15 years ago. But the role of CSOs was very, very critical. I can't tell you how thankful enough we are at the insights we hear. Very, very constructive comments. You might want to try this, you want to do this. We know this guy, this delegation. So we kept track of all of that. It was a lot of it was helpful. Some of it a bit too ambitious. So we had to be able to decide which one we would use to throw out there. In 2010, Christian, the situation was a little different than today. There was a little more hope. The Obama speech in Prague, for example, the initiation of the nuclear security summit, the NSS with the United States, for another one, where we were having the Sherpas and Swiss service were having very involved discussions. That was very helpful. The multilateralism had not yet suffered as much. In fact, multilateralism on the security side of things in the UN was at a peak. We were having consensus on things like terrorism, on AIDS, on peacekeeping. So there was very, very strong. It had not yet disintegrated, and it also lessened the burden on focus, which helped because the focus on the NPT was a little less focused because there was other things that were being discussed, and there was a lot of progress there. On the sanctions committee, we weren't getting vetoes, for example, on things we were thinking that would receive vetoes. So there was a lot of goodwill. The P5 were still talking among themselves. They presented we could talk to one would represent all of them. So that was very helpful. We had a very great guy like Tom Markham helping us out as head of secretariat. I had first worked with him in 1995 Review and Extension Conference when he was still in South Africa. Then he had transferred to UNODA, and he was fortunately the one who was assigned to us. So he did a lot to help us out. And at that time also there was the Iran issue was was going hot and cold, but we would catch the times when it would be somewhere in between. And the DPRK issue, under Article 10, there were still those who believed that they had not left and that they had been suspended, they can come back. The door was open. There were others who were saying no, they're in breach. So we were able to manage that, and that's one of the issues at the last minute. On the last day, that almost blocked consensus. The DPRK also, just the year before, was removed on the terrorist list of the United States. So there was some progress there, and DPRK was still attending the only regional security forum where they were present, which is the ASEAN Regional Forum, and they were attending at the ministerial level. So we were able to establish some dialogue with them within that forum. So there was a lot of positive things that were surrounding our negotiations then, and we were able to tap into that. Plus, it was World Cup year, so there was a lot of goodwill in terms of side bets and a lot of friendly ribbing on who's a better team or which team there was this octopus in Italy that were saying, choosing things. And so we would always use that as analogies to break when things were getting too tough. Like saying, when Gibran said, let's bring an octopus here to choose between two formulations. So it would always lighten the situation. But it was, right? I think it did seem easy, but it wasn't. Like I said, the slightest a delegation that might take offense at the slightest would be, it could unravel a lot of things and everything would start unraveling. Rather than everything unraveling, everything seemed to fall into place. And, when we saw what was happening, we said, well, let's go for broke. I mean, let's be ambitious, let's push. It really didn't start as a 64-point. It just grew. We have tried to accommodate everyone, and fortunately, the languages they proposed often did not offend any other delegation. So many of it came in. Then we're keeping our fingers crossed that no one will fall. But to begin with, we knew where the choke points would be, and even before the RevCon, we went to capitals and did many bilateral consultations and tried to show how much we understood the positions there. And I think that did a lot. Not just in the capital discussions, then we had 3 workshops in Manila, and we also worked with a lot of civil society to organize these kinds of track 2 discussions. We did also regional consultations, and we were always briefing them, sometimes us or to Indonesia throughout the process. Now those things are difficult to do next year. Things are very, very different. We in 2010 the flexibility was amazing. The compromise was amazing. The NPT 67 was a child of the Cold War. It was born at a time of deep bipolar divisions. And after the end of the Cold War, it was reborn, given eternal life. And in those 2 instances where there was agreement, the lifeblood of the NPT and its process was compromise and flexibility and understanding and inclusiveness. And perhaps in 2026, we need to reflect, take a few steps back and reflect on what happened then, why we did what we did, why we compromised this thing. And I don't like to use the term grand bargain. And then perhaps if we have understanding on that, why we got into this, then maybe we can tack on the other things that we're trying to do as we reflect on transparency, all the other things that we want to achieve with the conference. So it's going to be a lot more challenging, Christian, in 2026. We do try to keep optimism about it. And like I said, the discussions going on now or this afternoon for transparency. It's many people have different ideas what it should be, but the reason we put it there in 2010, like I said, was not so much to hold the nuclear weapons state. And clearly then when we were negotiating, it was just the 5 nuclear weapon states. The 0.5, 0.20, 21 does not apply to others. It's really, we got the 5 nuclear weapon states to the understanding was it was for them to show good faith in their desire to eventually comply with Article VI. And some of us want that Article VI faster, some of us probably don't want it too fast. But we didn't intend it to be a naming and shaming exercise where some nuclear weapon states can say, we're more transparent than you. You're not very nice. But you're not as transparent as us. Once it deteriorates to that kind of a discussion, we're never going to get consensus. So these are the landmines that we try to avoid when we could see confrontation coming, or one nuclear weapon state trying to hit somebody over the head with blindsiding them with an interpretation that was not intended. So clarifying those things is very important during our presidency, because for every point you have like 20 different interpretations, and the chair's role is to make sure that there's no extraneous, that the intent of the party, the spirit of that understanding is there. And although states will always read into that what they want, if the chair has to make clear, no, that's not the understanding. You can say anything you want, but that's not. So sometimes that's a gamble also, because people might not like it, that you don't agree with them, and they'll just block things out of spite. And that we saw that coming also, so we had to avoid those kinds of. And one other thing, there's a lot of personalities involved. Personality clashes were also something we had to understand and avoid. I think Lebron then had an advisor, was a psychologist on personal dynamics, that when you see potential conflict, no matter how understated, you have to be ready to jump in and try to de-escalate or bridge, whichever is appropriate. So I think that's the long and short. Talking about it, I still get post-traumatic stress. Many sleepless nights. We were holding on to papers where there was agreement. When it was very flimsy, it could easily unravel. So I think we ended up drinking too much coffee and stay away. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Master. We'll do the questions at the end of the event, but I felt I was there in 2010. It was a long time ago, and I was amazed at the efficiency of your team, especially Master Kabachelon, and how I was mentioning this too, how when you had the agreement, how fast he gavelled it.
There's a story to that.
Making sure that no one would object. So since in the 2010 NPT Review Conference, it was the first mention of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, and that led to a series of conferences that eventually led to the creation of the TPNW. On that note, we have Julia, who's a counselor at the Mission of Austria in Geneva, and we'll talk about the origins of the TPNW and how it links to Article VI.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you to the missions from Kiribati and the Philippines for bringing us together today. And I'd like to immediately start off with the 2010, where Ambassador Zorda has left off, and take us a little bit down memory lane to remember what actually happened in the past 15 years and what was so new and significant about it. And I mean, in April 2010 in Geneva, the then ICRC President Kallenberg had a very emotional and moving speech about the humanitarian consequences of the Hiroshima bombing and ICRC response, which was just not adequate. And because he spoke so literal about it, it made an impression on the diplomats that then a couple of weeks after went to the 2010 PrepCom. That's how it all started, and the discussion of the humanitarian consequences made it into the review cycle in the first place. And as the ambassador has alluded to, it was difficult in 2010, but there was a readiness to take on board at least some of the elements of pressing concern for the non-nuclear weapons state majority via the humanitarian consequences and concrete commitments that we see in Action 5. And even if implementation has been woeful or is reversing right now, we need to remember that there was this engagement willingness in 2010. So we have in the final document reference to the deep concerns at the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. And what's so special about it is that for the first time that the humanitarian dimension was explicitly addressed in the NPT consensus since the adoption in 1968. And when we look at the NPT itself in the preamble paragraph, it speaks about the consequences of nuclear war as well. But between 1968 and 2010, there were no references on this. And because of the momentum that was started with this particular reference, we can see in the review cycle right after, between 2012 and 2015, an acceleration of states parties wanting to engage on the issue and feeling that this is something of great concern for them. It started out in the first PrepCom in 2012 with a 16-nation statement under the leadership of Switzerland. And throughout the first committee and then the other two PrepComs in 2015 at the REFCON became a 159 states party statement. So within just one review cycle of a matter of 3-4 years, we see that almost a tenfold increase of states parties saying that this is something we want to discuss and that's important to us. Of course, the 2015 REFCON did not have an outcome, but because in parallel to the review cycle, we also had a number of humanitarian impact conferences that were organized by Norway, Mexico, and Austria with a broad engagement from civil society, academia, and also states parties that increased the momentum and also brought a lot of research and knowledge on the humanitarian consequences to the diplomatic community really in the review cycle as well. The humanitarian discourse, therefore, in 2015 was a very important one. It was central to the disarmament debates. And we could see, for example, the NAC called for a legally binding instrument to implement Article VI. And there were a lot of other states and engagement, as well as the joint statement I mentioned earlier, that were brought forward in the review conference in 2015. So it was a very central element of the debate. But because there was no outcome document, it gave a further impetus for advancing the disarmament aims of non-nuclear weapon states. So we need to always remember that the TPNW didn't come from nowhere. There was a lot of movement before that, and there were a lot of statements and a lot of concerns raised before the TPNW really entered into force as well. For example, in 2015, then in the first committee, we saw 2 resolutions, also one that came out of the Humanitarian Impact Conference, which was called the Humanitarian Pledge, and that called for a legally binding instrument, and a mandate of an open-ended working group that was mandated to submit a report and recommendations to the UNGA on measures that could contribute to taking forward multilateral disarmament negotiations. In 2016, as an outcome of that open-ended working group, the Taking Forward Multilateral Nuclear Disarmament Negotiations resolution was adopted by 123 member states, and with it started the negotiations on the TPNW that were concluded in 2017. And the goal of that was very explicitly strengthening an increasingly frail NPT by contributing to the implementation of Article VI. So from the beginning, the states that negotiated the TPNW had a very clear view on how the TPNW would strengthen the NPT and how it was complementary. That was also framed in the way of the strengthening the legal and political norm against the use of nuclear weapons, and trigger for elaboration of additional measures, really. And maybe to have a look at also as a way forward, because then we see, of course, the TPNW entered into force, and our colleague in Kazakhstan will speak on that later, what happened after. But from the TPNW member states, states parties, the view was always that the TPNW contributes to the implementation of the NPT. And it's indeed, the treaty explicitly makes reference to the NPT as well. And it was born out of good faith and a strong sense of urgency towards implementing Article VI. In the point of view of the TPNW states parties, it's that the business as usual approach to the NPT is not sufficient. It requires calling out the risks that are too high at this stage when we talk about the humanitarian consequences. And in this regard, I'd also like to maybe briefly jump ahead in a way on the security concerns, and that was discussed quite recently, the security concerns of TPNW states. As a way of security can no longer be understood as the security of a few when it comes to nuclear weapons. It's necessary to engage in discussions in the NPT as well about security concerns of those states that do not have nuclear weapons, because any use will have an impact on all of us. And as has been said by Ambassador Soretta as well, in looking ahead to next year, we have made the call several times in the past 2 weeks as well on having serious and honest discussions about these issues for the review conference next year. There needs to be a forum for that. And we have heard diverging arguments being made over and over again without genuine engagement. And there is a need to listen to each other to get progress next year. There should be plenty of middle ground that can be found as a way of putting a final draft to the referendum outcome document, because there are a lot of scientific findings on the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons, international humanitarian law compliance, and a lot of that also comes out of the TPNW process. Additionally, autonomy is a field where progress could be made, at least in our view. We're seeing first mentions of human control, but much more could be elaborated on this. And I'd also like to make the point that TPNW states have a good standing in the NPT, and with the TPNW actually have committed to even more stringent obligations when it comes to nuclear disarmament, in terms of safeguards agreements, and also on verification, for example. And as we will be discussing complementarity a little bit later, I also wanted to point out that complementarity has to be seen on disarmament, on non-proliferation, and a lot has been said already by TPNW states parties on this, but also there are other intersectionalities that one could look to, and how we could start engaging with each other and learn from each other and benefit from the work that has been done also in the NPT review cycle. And one of that, for example, is verification. The TPNW discusses how one can verify the implementation of Article VI. It's the irreversibility and verifiability, and that can be used also in the NPT as a way of strengthening the NPT. Another issue is, of course, victim assistance and environmental remediation that has not really been discussed within the NPT framework, but that could help to build good faith and a way forward. And another is further research, knowledge, and acknowledgement of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons as a way of strengthening the ultimate goal of the total elimination that is enshrined in Article VI. So there are a couple of areas where we could engage in, and that's the urge from Austria as well, to have an open mind. We know there are different views on the TPNW and how it contributes to the NPT Article VI obligations, but there are ways in different areas where it could strengthen the review process in the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks. And you talked about and touched upon protective assistance and environmental remediation as a means of showing good faith by the nuclear weapon states. And I think that's a very crucial segue into our work with Kazakhstan, Kiribati, and Kazakhstan are co-pen holders of the resolution addressing the legacy of nuclear weapons, as well as the co-chairs of the working group on Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW, the Victim Assistance, Environmental Remediation, International Cooperation and Assistance. And on that note, I would like to segue to Mr. Azamat Karolida, who's the consul at the mission of Kazakhstan here in New York, and we're very thankful that Kazakhstan is also co-sponsoring today's side event. So I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Christian. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. So Kazakhstan is honored to co-sponsor this important dialogue as we approach the 2026 NPT conference. And we thank our fellow co-sponsors and participants for their shared commitment to advance the disarmament objective for the treaty and agreement in Article 6. After 2 weeks of intense weeks of negotiations, statements, working papers, caffeine diplomacy, it's a relief to gather in a room where Article 6 is not just a number of a paragraph, but actually the main agenda. For Kazakhstan, nuclear disarmament is not just a matter of theory, it is a living reality. Between 1949 and 1989, more than 450 nuclear tests were conducted at the Semipalatinsk test site, affecting over 1.5 million of our citizens. These tests left lasting scars on our people, our environment, and our development. It is a legacy that informs Kazakhstan's principal stance on disarmament, and why we voluntarily renounced the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal after independence. Dear colleagues, today the NPT is under strain. 2 consecutive review conferences have failed. Article 6 remains unfulfilled. Nuclear doctrines are shifting, arsenals are modernizing, arms control agreements are eroding. We must confront these realities with resolve and creativity, not resignation. Kazakhstan believes that the 2026 review conference must not become another missed opportunity. The time has come to shift from commitments to measurable implementation of Article 6. We call on nuclear weapon states to take concrete, transparent, and time-bound steps toward disarmament, including restoration of free dialogue, enhanced transparency, and legally binding elections. Kazakhstan views the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, TPNW, as mentioned in Italy, as a complementary instrument to the NPT. As president of the third meeting of state parties to the TPNW last March, and co-chair of the working group on Article 6 and 7, alongside Ms. Kiribati, we have advanced proposals for the establishment of an international trust fund for victim assistance and environmental remediation. These provisions represent the humanitarian core of the treaty, and we are working to operationalize them through sustained cooperation. We also proudly preside over the adoption of the political declaration entitled Strengthening Our Commitment to a World Free of Nuclear Weapons and its Rising Global Instability during the last TPNW meeting in March, which reaffirmed the urgency of the disarmament, condemned nuclear threats, and reaffirmed the complementarity of the TPNW with a broad disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. In 2024, Kazakhstan and Kiribati, as Christian mentioned, successfully tabled a resolution entitled Addressing the Legacy of Nuclear Weapons, adopted with 174 votes in favor. This resolution underscores the need for international assistance to affected communities and reflects growing consensus that disarmament must be people-centered and justice-oriented. I would like to emphasize, we believe that the legacy of nuclear weapons must be treated not just a historical issue, but as a contemporary humanitarian challenge. At the 2026 review conference, we hope to see acknowledgement of the harm suffered by affected communities and willingness to support concrete steps, whether through cooperation mechanisms, environmental remediation, or technical assistance. Our joint resolution with Kiribati was an important step in that direction, and we invite state parties to help carry this momentum forward into review conference deliberations. So, dear colleagues, if I may add a few more points. Kazakhstan continues to champion nuclear weapon-free zones. As co-founder of the Central Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone, we advocate for the establishment of new zones, including in the Middle East and Northeast Asia, and stronger coordination among existing ones. Our August 2024 Astana workshop brought together all existing zones, P5, UN bodies, and civil society to discuss institutional cooperation and legally binding negative security assurances. We urge the final ratification of Central Asian Nuclear-Free Weapon-Free Zone Protocol by the United States and call for the removal of interpretive declarations that undermine the spirit of NWFZ treaties. Dear colleagues, the host of the IAEA's low-enriched uranium ban, Kazakhstan also champions the peaceful uses of nuclear energy in the line with Article VI. We also believe that equity must be restored within the agency, especially for arealess states who remain underrepresented in the key regional groupings, despite a clear resolution to the contrary. In closing, dear colleagues, Kazakhstan believes that all responsible states, regardless of size and status, have a duty to uphold the integrity of the nuclear disarmament regime. At the time of growing polarization and strategic mistrust, we must work together to restore confidence, reinforce international legal norms, and place the humanitarian imperative at the heart of the nuclear policy. Through principled engagement, inclusive dialogue, and practical cooperation, we can revitalize multilateralism and ensure that NPT continues to serve as a foundation for global peace and security. Disarmament is not nostalgia, it's a necessity. It's not about the past, but about ensuring that what happened in Semipalatinsk, Hiroshima, and elsewhere never happens again. Let us rise to this challenge together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azala. Thank you also for mentioning our joint resolution on addressing the legacy of nuclear weapons. And in that resolution, there's a request to the Secretary General to convene a one-day meeting on victim assistance and environmental remediation, which hopefully will be convened prior to the NPT review conference. Now I would like to introduce our final speaker, Mr. Sheldon, from the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons.
That's the one.
That's one. I'm sorry. I was just trying to find out.
There's no other.
Yeah. And where he serves as the General Counsel and the UN liaison.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian, and thanks to Kiribati for convening us. It is timely, as you say, Christian, at the beginning, because there is such a live discussion about complementarity in the context of the draft recommendations. I suppose it could have been more timely if we did it a few days ago, right? And maybe influence some of the discussions too. But we welcome the opportunity to take this narrative forward and this discussion forward, looking toward the REDCON thanks also to the Philippines and Kazakhstan and Austria for these really helpful perspectives for me. I don't have myself all of the institutional knowledge, but so I guess we're the CSO perspective on this panel, right? Although there are numerous CSO representatives in the room, many of them are part of the effort that we've been taking forward. We are, for those who don't know, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons is a global campaign. It's over 700 NGOs in 110 countries that are all advancing the elimination of nuclear weapons. And through the TPNW, and we are observers to the TPNW and the meetings of states parties and the coordinating committee, and so I guess it's no surprise that I have like-minded perspectives with the states that have spoken here, and with most of the states in the NPT, given that the majority of NPT states are TPNW states at this point. And I should add too that we won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for our efforts to advance the story of the humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, but also for our work to advance the TPNW. So I think perhaps the fact that we think that the TPNW is obviously complementary of the NPT and Article VI of the NPT is probably not surprising, and that the thoughts that I quickly prepared for this panel, are very duplicative of Julia's, I think, or at least maybe the word I'm looking for is complementary to Julia's. But I will add a few perspectives to this origin story that hopefully are helpful. First about the efforts of TPNW states toward Article VI. Article VI, as we know, requires pursuing negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race and to nuclear disarmament relating to. It seems just so obvious to so many that this TPNW must be an effective measure. TPNW states declared this in the treaty text, as Julia said. That was negotiated language that I think reinforces that. And then in each of the meetings of states parties issued declarations declaring that because it is one such effective measure, because it is the first comprehensive legal prohibition of nuclear weapons. It is a legally binding instrument with comprehensive prohibitions. It applies to all states parties equally without discrimination. It includes a framework for verified, time-bound elimination of nuclear weapons programs, and it includes a framework to address harm caused by the use and testing of nuclear weapons. I think in one statement to the PrepCom that South Africa described arguments to the contrary as baffling. Whether or not the TPNW ultimately serves as the instrument that brings about a world without nuclear weapons, this we cannot know at this stage in time. But for it to be an effective measure, as is required under Article VI, I think at this stage in time, it's impossible to me to see how it can be considered otherwise. Article VI requires honest efforts, right? The language is to pursue negotiations in good faith. And we heard from Austria the origin story in this regard that explicitly said that this was the intent over and over. And for those states negotiating it, the TPNW was never considered the sole instrument to achieve disarmament, to achieve Article VI. Always assumed to be one of a panoply of instruments that would take us forward to a nuclear weapons-free world. And of course, the converse must be said as well, and South Africa said this in their general statement, the NPT is not and never has been an instrument that stands on its own either. So whether we will see, fissile material treaties, or it was always the assumption of the negotiators that there would be other instruments that take us there. But the question is this a component of a nuclear weapons-free world? And we think that it's so clear that it is. I know that I was asked to speak about complementarity with Article VI, but we could also speak about complementarity in so many other regards. As Julia also said, that with respect to non-proliferation, the safeguards under the TPNW are more stringent and more explicit in the TPNW than in the NPT itself. And South Africa, I'm referencing them again in their Cluster 1 statement, said that the TPNW represents the highest non-proliferation standard that any state can commit to, thereby strengthening and complementing the NPT. I think that we can point to so many other elements of the work that's being done. If you look at the Vienna Action Plan, which was the action plan that was first adopted at the first meeting of states parties, there were 4 actions that related to complementarity with the NPT and other instruments that are in the nuclear weapons architecture. And they set forth a roadmap for cooperating with other relevant bodies and treaties to do outreach, to raise awareness. 2 co-facilitators were appointed to lead the work of facilitating work to address the complementarity of the TPNW with related instruments, and there have been numerous programs in the work of the TPNW states that have taken that work forward. Actually, you could look at, ICANN has a web page that tracks the intersessional work of the TPNW, and has these cards with a little QR code on them. So if you haven't visited it, you can go read each of the meetings that takes forward the work to evaluate and implement the complementarity of the TPNW. Just to focus for a second on this concept of good faith, because I think it's interesting, and I wonder sometimes, I know in private law, it's a well-litigated concept of standards of good faith and reasonable efforts, and sometimes in international law, it's not always clear to me what it means, but I think whatever it means, I think we check the box with our TPNW states, and I think that's very, very clear. Conversely, I think, if we're evaluating and doing a report card on states taking forward Article VI, and look at what's on the other side of the ledger, I think we're talking about, nuclear armed states are saying that they're taking forward Article VI, all while expanding arsenals and then doing all these rhetorical gymnastics to defend modernization or expansion of silos or potential expansion of sharing, and spending $92 billion a year to do so. So I think, by contrast, TPNW states are clearly doing the work of non-proliferation and disarmament both in action and in words. Certainly, we could have states that join the TPNW that could perhaps be worth, having that discussion. There are non-nuclear weapon states that, were they to join, could make a complicated discussion on this. But the states that are in the treaty so far, these are the most unimpeachable states on this issue, I think. It's also worth saying that those states are not merely states that reject nuclear weapons because they don't have them or can't have them. It's something, an argument you might be faced with by people who are, I think, quite unsophisticated about these matters. These are states that have explicitly made decisions not to pursue nuclear weapons because they see it in their national interest not to. And they include states that haven't, as we know, right? We have states like South Africa or Kazakhstan that Brazil as a signatory that had to work to get rid of nuclear weapons. So, good faith effort, I think it's very clear to me, and I think it's worth, closing the book on that and being very, very adamant about it in NPT documents. And then asking the corollary question, if not this, then what? I think we'd all be willing to give up on a semantic debate for meaningful progress. I think, it's not as though Plan A for civil society or for anyone pursuing a world without nuclear weapons. It's not like Plan A was that we should have the rest of the world that doesn't have nuclear weapons lead the process. We always hoped that nuclear armed states would see it in their interests for decades, right, to do it, but they haven't. Even though it's baked into the very architecture of the UN and the NPT that should happen, it hasn't happened. So I think, I think given the backsliding and the very, very dangerous dynamics of the world today, I think we really all need to welcome the efforts of TPNW states as we look toward the review conference and dynamics ahead. We need to recognize that at this moment in time, with 98 states having signed or ratified the TPNW, this is a growing body of states that are soon to be a majority, already are a majority in the NPT, given the 4 nuclear armed states that aren't in the NPT and all that math. But by next year, by 2026, in the review conference, it will be a very clear majority, both in the UN and the NPT. So, yes, we realize that given NPT dynamics, there's and a consensus-based process. That doesn't mean that they're all treated equally in the NPT, but at some point, I think it will become more and more imperative that these voices are really recognized. And I like how Asamat put it that Article VI needs to be more than words on a page. It needs to translate into genuine efforts. For Kazakhstan, it's a lived reality, as Asamat said, but in this 80th year since the US first used nuclear weapons, we need to recognize that it's a lived reality for many millions of people, given the intergenerational effects and the transboundary effects of thousands of detonations. And now in this moment, it remains a great existential threat more than ever for all of humanity. So I think no matter your views on whether the TPNW will ultimately deliver or not, I think it will deliver and it must deliver on ultimate disarmament. But regardless of what you think about that, I think we need to be grateful for the TPNW and the lifeblood that it gives to Article VI right now, and we need to acknowledge that it's clearly complementary. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Seth, for your strong remarks. Now I would like to open up the floor for Q&A. Any questions for esteemed panelists? Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful complementary aspects of the TPNW, I believe, is its codification of international humanitarian law because of its focus on the consequences of the expected consequences of the use of nuclear weapons, rather than the distorted argument that destroying civilization is a collateral aspect of it. The focus on the actual consequences shows that the deployments as they are now violate IHL. It seems to me that the TPNW codifies the existing IHL prohibition on the contemplated uses. And that to me is an argument that hasn't been effectively advanced. And in fact, some people say that the TPNW is what makes nuclear weapons illegal. I would contend that international humanitarian law already makes the contemplated uses illegal. So I would ask you to comment on that, because I know you have a legal background and understand how important it would be over time to be able to establish that customary international law prohibits nuclear weapons in the way when Syria, not a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention, used chemical weapons, and they were universally condemned under the principle that this violated international humanitarian law.
I order to ask more questions first.
I think
We could say, that I think I agree that international humanitarian law makes any use of nuclear weapons illegal, and it did before the TPNW existed. I believe that. But the TPNW goes a lot further. And we're talking about a comprehensive prohibition use, preparations for use, possession, threats of use, which, that's also quite a line of debate. But I think the full rejection of anything to do, anything along the life cycle of a nuclear weapon is certainly a more comprehensive prohibition than we have under customary international law before. So, but no, yes, if we're talking about complementarity, I do believe that you're correct that TPAW complements Article VI, it complements international humanitarian law.
I'd say it codifies it.
Codifies it, fine, sure. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please.
Thank you. Rebecca Johnson, Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy, and also on ICANN's steering group, and of course involved in NPT meetings since 1994 and in the process that led to the TPNW as well. And I guess I just wanted to, not to dance on a legal pinhead, because I am not a lawyer, my training was in physics, so I like to look at reality as it is. And one of the things that really makes it concrete, and I apologize for being a bit late into this meeting, I didn't actually know it was taking place because I was having a long conversation with somebody from one of the other delegations. But I did a paper called Making the NPT Work for Global Security, which I think we would all agree was the outstanding kind of fundamental purpose of the NPT back in after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1968, when it was codified into a treaty. And so what I wanted to do for this one, which I actually wrote last year for the Geneva PrepCom, that then I got COVID, so I couldn't go to, but really was to focus on the global security angle and then look at prevent nuclear escalation and use leading to nuclear war, eliminate nuclear weapons, and gave the date that was chosen, in fact, through the C7 process that was really run out of Japan last year. And then declare nuclear weapon use a crime against humanity and war crime, which the ICC still does not do, because it focuses, it did that for chemical weapons and biological weapons because there were treaties that clearly completely prohibited the use, the possession, and all the activities that could lead up to anyone using those weapons. And Mexico particularly has tried very much to change this, but with so many members of the TPNW now among states and also supported by civil society, it looks at that being a key aspect that could really be worked on if informally, if the TPNW states would actually band together to recognize that nuclear weapons, as well as chemical and biological, needed to be recognized to be war crimes, the use and the threat of use. And I think that goes to the point was made. And then finally, the promoting humanitarian security, climate justice and peace. And all of the steps that I was identifying here, and I brought the copies because I'd already printed them for last year, rather than reprint here, because they're still valid in this context. I don't like the term complementarity because it's one of those jargon words in diplomacy, and we can all use it. But all of these steps actually are completely consistent between the TPNW and Articles 1, 2, 6, and 7 of the NPT. And that is something that we, as states and as civil society, could really be looking more closely at where the commonalities. And this is why this debate on whether or not the TPNW, this is purely an NPT 5 nuclear-armed states kind of with a few of their allies. It's a diversion from the realities. And I think that Seth has very, very effectively laid out why we should just not play that game. We need to behave as civil society with governments who are part of both those treaties and try to find and to take to the 2 review conferences next year a clear understanding of how much these 2 treaties could benefit and strengthen the implementation of both of them to the greater good of all of us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for your comments. Any more questions, comments?
So the NPT review conference is in the year. Have any, John Burroughs Lawyers Committee policy, have any of you been observing some sort of promising or hopeful things happening in this PrepCom that can be built upon going into the
Absolutely.
Speaking from 2010, the RepCon actually starts on a clean slate. Things that happened in the PrepComs before it were helpful, but everybody, either because sometimes it's just the fact that there are new people, so we eventually almost start off with and you can be as ambitious as you want. That's the way we did it.
Isn't that sort of an indictment of the PrepCom process?
To be frank, we found a lot of pitfalls in trying to refer back to the RepCom. There was a lot of animosity coming out of 2005 to the point that it was either you try to solve it or you move on. We've decided to move on when we saw the opportunity for it. There are a lot of details I could give. In fact, on the very last day, surprisingly, there were 2 things that were holding on. That's why Libra had to suspend while we did some floor negotiations. And surprisingly, it wasn't from the nuclear fight. It was a problem that was outside, 2 problems outside the nuclear fight. And we didn't anticipate that as much as we did the others. We probably did a good job of trying to anticipate the problems that the nuclear fight did. And so those things slipped under the radar. And the president, what's important to the president is since he must start consultations as early as possible. Anticipate where the bottlenecks are, and if by some miracle there's peace in Ukraine, that might be helpful. That momentum will carry over. So fingers crossed on that. So now, I've been in the review process. My first RepCon was 95, and I've been in everything until to now. And I really noticed that sometimes the PrepCom, a lot of work goes into it, and the chairs of the 3 committees do a lot of hard work, but it's really up to the presidency of the RepCom to work everything, not bring in the baggage, start anew where he has to, ride on to global development that are positive, give credit where credit is due, try to understand the positions of those who, and not be too judgmental of some of the positions that are a lot more often than not rhetorical than reflective of that. There's in the rhetoric there might not be that many red lines, but the rhetoric might sound like it. So you need to delve deep into that. It's not an easy process. Just one comment on what Jonathan raised, and relates to the work of the Lawyers Committee. In the ICJ in '96, a lot of us tried to argue that nuclear weapons are against humanitarian law, very clearly so. They're indiscriminate, very clearly so. But the court pretty much said that if states believe that, they should come and negotiate a treaty. So that's a bit of a setback. And then in terms of cost of TPNW enshrining, crystallizing the customary norms, the rules and customary norms, there are two elements. And in terms of the opinion yours, as long as there's a persistent objector, and the ICJ has said this in many other cases, it would only apply to those who subscribe to it. And in the 1950s case, ICJ said it can even be isolated to a region, customary norm, as long as those who don't agree to it. So there's a lot more work to do. I don't think, if we want to push for prohibition of nuclear weapons as violative of humanitarian law, there's still a lot of work to do. And this brings me to the great irony, and Julia has heard it before from me. When it comes to humanitarian law, the great irony is states only sit down and negotiate these agreements once the devastation and death has happened. It's ironic that states have to experience first the devastation of chemical weapons, biological weapons, hollow points of poisoned arrows, before they actually sit down and say, we shouldn't do this, guys. And it brings to the other irony where the UN prohibits war, except in two instances, Council action and Article 51. Yet, so Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter says there should be no more war. And yet we have this huge body of humanitarian laws that says, if you are going to go to war, that's the way you do it. Yes. So we have a lot of irony in international law, and we have to weave through that and to see where the real victories are, and know that we need a lot more work towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, would you like to share some of your reflections? We have enough time for one or two more questions. If anyone has any more burning comments or a question to share. Maybe not to put them on the spot, but I know that we have some young people in the audience. Perhaps one of them would like to ask a question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mohammed. I am a youth delegate for Diverse Defense. It's a youth initiative of Nuclear Foundation. If I had to ask a question, I would definitely say something about the TPNW's effort to consolidate support, especially that it's being pushed by the New Gender Coalition. One of its member states has yet to ratify the treaty. How is it, consolidating the parallel or the, how do I say this, duplicative process where some states are saying, no, we need to step away from the NPT and strengthen, step away from the TPNW and strengthen the NPT. How do you convince those states that, those two treaties can exist at the same time and complement each other instead of, be parallel?
Thank you. Sai?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. And something I've said before, we yet have to have this discussion openly and respectfully. And hear really what the particular concerns are, and also from a TPNW States Party's point of view, maybe also express better what our concerns are and our arguments are, and engage and understand each other's viewpoints and move forward from that. So this discussion, from how we see it, has not fully happened yet. We've heard arguments in the rooms, we've heard statements, but we haven't had honest discussion about it.
And just add, I guess, the very good question that there's two next states that haven't fully joined. This is Brazil that signed but not ratified, and Egypt. And I think they're both supporters of the treaty, and the reasons why they haven't joined are different. And I don't think for either of them it's a matter of it's a complementarity with the NPT issue. So I don't know if that's even, to my mind, has not been in discussions with them a concern. They have concerns, but perhaps will not resolve them. But I think that it is, as Julie says, a matter of continuing to engage and make the arguments, but I don't know if it's a complementary issue.
So much that. We'll have this will be the last question, please.
Jackie Cabasso from Western States Legal Foundation in the United States. So, Ambassador, you mentioned that perhaps an end to the war in Ukraine would be a positive factor for the conference. So I'm going to ask a question that's maybe the elephant in the room, but I'm wondering to what extent do concerns and uncertainty about the United States government leadership at this time cast in the discussions that have been going on and looking ahead?
Well, that's we have to maintain faith in the professionalism of the bureaucracy that's behind U.S. foreign policy. I believe that having been a deputy in Washington for some time, there exists within State Department, the West Wing, NSC, professionals who have a nationalist and who have the interest of the United States at heart, and they know what should be done. They're adjusting now to the current leadership, probably because they could lose their jobs as federal employees. So they're not yet sending up memos that lay out certain strategies or visions beyond 4 years of the current presidency. I think they are there. Once given the opportunity, once things stabilize, and it's very important that the Secretary of State has dialogue with these professionals. I'm hoping that maybe not just on the RepCom, but on many multilateral issues, especially dealing with funding and even the bilateral issues, that there will be a stable, more strategic voice that will emerge and might be heard. Keeping fingers crossed. They're there. There are a lot of very good people, professionals there. A little muted right now, but hopefully they'll come up. But that's just my personal.
Of course.
Because we have good relations with the United States.
Thank you for being so candid.
So on that note, I would like to thank everyone for coming to today's event, and please have a good rest of your day.